Yes, Mats Zuccarello did have a bit of a dip in his numbers from 2 years ago to last year, but still had a pretty darn good season. We recap 2022-2023 for the Lizard King, as well as what to expect in 2023-2024 on today's episode of Locked on Wild.
You're Locked on Wild, your daily podcast on the Minnesota Wild. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is happening, everybody? Welcome into another episode of Locked on Wild, your daily Minnesota Wild podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you, as always, for making Locked on Wild your first listen each and every day. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube and your favorite podcast platform so you don't miss out on any of our new episodes throughout the week. Today's episode of Locked on Wild is brought to you by Bird Dogs. You can head to birddogs.com/lockedonnhl or enter promo code LockedOnNHL for a free water bottle with any order. I guarantee you are not going to want to take your bird dogs off once you put them on. On today's episode of Locked on Wild, we take a look at expectations for Mats Zuccarello for the 2023-2024 season. We'll take a look at what actually ended up being a very solid season for Zuccarello. We'll look at some of the month-by-month numbers for the Lizard King, as well as what the future has in store for the opposite of Kirill Kaprizov on the top line. My name is Seth Topal, your daily Minnesota Wild insider, and a couple of announcements right off the top on the show. You may have seen on social media that we got some exciting news for the 2023-2024 season. Locked on Wild has received full season credentials, and so we will be covering every game at the XL Energy Center this season. And I have to say, I cannot wait for what that will bring. And so appreciate everybody tuning in on a daily basis to make Locked on Wild what it is. We're hoping that this upcoming season is just an absolute blast. We're going to have so much fun covering it for you. Cannot wait to get started. You may also notice over the last couple of days, been battling a little bit of the crud. And so I've been trying to grind through that as well, which is why there have not been episodes the last couple of days. But we're back. We're here. We're ready to rock. Let's talk about Mats Zuccarello and what we can expect for him for this season. Now, it is ironic because on further review, I had a few opinions on Mats Zuccarello's season that came out after the year was done. And for Zuccarello, noted that there was a dip in production when Kirill Kaprizov got injured, but failed to mention some of the things that do need to be put out there for what Zuccarello accomplished this past season. 67 points for Zuccarello, the second most he has ever had in a season, trailing only 2 years ago the 79 points that he put up in 70 games. He played in 78 games this past season, which is the most he's played in a season since 2017-2018. Also ended up with 22 goals, which is the third most that he has ever scored in a season. And so there was a lot of good for Zuccarello this past season, and he absolutely lit it up for a good stretch of the year. Had 9 goals in the month of December and 20 total points, including a hat trick game against the Chicago Blackhawks. And so it's not like he had a season on par with the likes of, what we saw from Ryan Hartman, who got frustrated out on the ice, which led to a dip in numbers, which led to him being bounced all over the lineup. It's not like he had a season like Marcus Foligno did, where his production dropped substantially and injuries led him to not being in the lineup as much either. Just had a dip in production from a career high season for him 2 years ago. A 12-point dip in production from one season to the next is not a ton. Zuccarello ended up playing in 8 more games. And you look at some of the other areas in which he established career highs as well. Career high 9 power play goals this season. Had a career high 29 power play points this past year. Took a career high 198 shots. That did lead to a dip in his shooting percentage to 11.1%, but logged over 20 minutes of ice time per game, which was a career high for him as well. And all of the other numbers as well, right in line with some of the best that he's had throughout the course of his career. So, why does it seem like it was a bad season? Well, as the season wore on, it did seem like Zuccarello kind of lost a little bit. And he mentioned this himself after the season was over and while he was trying to figure out kind of life after Kirill Kaprizov with Kirill on the shelf after he was injured against Winnipeg. Zuccarello did say that there was some shaky confidence during that stretch in which it just took him a little while to kind of get things figured out. Um, we did have Matt Boldy step in to help fill some of that lack of production. So you look at, say, the month of March, in which Zuccarello had 2 goals and a total of 8 points. And then in February had 1 goal and 9 total points in that stretch. Didn't shoot the best, but is still contributing. And again, the overall body of work looks really good for this past season. It just seemed like things tailed off at the end of the year. In the postseason, Zuccarello had a couple of goals, was far from the biggest problem on the team. It just seemed like everybody just did not have that gear that they needed to get over the Dallas Stars in the first round of the playoffs. So, as we've seen with a lot of different players from this past season, had a good regular season. Postseason was a collective failure by the team, and so it's one of those situations you just have to move on and try to be more consistent for this upcoming season. So that obviously a topic that we'll discuss here on today's show. And we'll also take a look at what we can expect statistically from Mats Zuccarello in key spots, as well as expectations for how the year will go for the man they call the Lizard King here for the Wild this season. So all of that coming up on today's show as we continue today's episode of Locked On Wild after this. I got to be real honest. I am very particular with the type of shorts that I wear during the summer, and it comes down to feel for me. There is nothing worse than those hot and stuffy cargo pants that I spent a majority of my life wearing all the way from a teen to my adult years as well. But then I stumbled upon bird dogs and it changed the game for me. And really, it comes down to the simple fact that bird dogs are the most comfortable short I have ever worn in my life. They're not just a short, though. You can wear them while you are on the go. You can wear them everywhere from the golf course to just sitting at home watching Netflix. And the best part is when you head to birddogs.com/lockedonnhl, you can get a free Bird Dogs water bottle with every order. That's birddogs.com/lockedonnhl for a free water bottle at checkout. So go grab 1 pair, go grab 2 pairs, go grab 10 pairs. Whatever you do, make sure you head to birddogs.com/lockedonnhl. And when you order, you'll get a free Bird Dogs water bottle with your order. A word of warning though, when you put your Bird Dogs on, it's going to be very hard for you to ever take them off. Continuing today's episode of Locked On Wild, once again, thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. For the everydayers, we will continue Locked On Wild Boot Camp as we discuss the defense. We'll talk Jared Spurgeon for today's second episode. And then next week, we will move through a bunch of the defensemen as well. we've got the preseason on the way. We've got training camp on the way. We're hoping to get some big names to hop on here as we get closer to the start of the season. So stay tuned for that as well. So what can we expect from Mats Zuccarello for this upcoming season? As we look at his statistics, let's start with the goals. 22 goals is an intriguing number for me because Zuccarello is a very adept, borderline elite passer as a player. That's kind of where his bread and butter comes in, but he is a good shooter himself as well. So I feel like we have seen Zuccarello, especially on special teams, become kind of a take charge guy at various points. And he is one of the veterans on this team. And so when he is going right and he is really playing with a lot of confidence, the team follows. The team follows that lead. Just look at what happened in game 3 of the series against the Dallas Stars. Zuccarello had a couple of goals. Once he got the first goal of the game, it seemed like things started to open up for him and just played with a ton of swagger. And it was a lot of fun to see him do his thing out on the ice. And so I think, honestly, for me, a good number for Zuccarello from the goals perspective is between 20 and 25. Has always been that type of player when healthy throughout the course of his career. Somebody that can get you upwards of 20 to 25 goals. Has done that the last 2 seasons for the Minnesota Wild while playing 70 plus goals in each instance. And so I think that is an easy bet to make, is that Zuccarello will hit the 20 goal mark, assuming he plays more than 70 games this season. And with his particular style of play, again, he's not a player that is overly physical. He will hit when needed. So it's not like he is, a fighter out there that is going to put himself at risk. It's just as you get older, you are more susceptible to injuries here and there. So I feel good about an over on 22 goals, maybe by 1 or 2. That feels like a good opportunity just for a push for Zuccarello in those aspects. But I will take the over here. I will also take, I'm going to take 75 games plus for Zuccarello this season. So I think we get 75 games. I think we get another 20 plus goal season. Zuccarello, as far as the assists go, had 55 2 years ago, 45 this past season. And as we've talked about through pretty much all of Locked On Wild Boot Camp, I just don't see this offense being nearly as anemic as it was at points from this past season. I think there is going to be a better opportunity for puck movement in general throughout the course of the season, which is going to lead to more assists for Zuccarello, as well as Kaprizov, as well as really anybody on that top line. And you also are hoping to avoid that stretch in which you had Sam Steele on the top line, and I think you scored 1 point in like 14 games. So you take out that type of a stretch, you get more consistent play at that center position, regardless of who it is. Should lead to more points for Zuccarello. And so if you look at his body of work and you get a guy who can give you 20 to 25 goals and somewhere around 40 to 50 assists, you'll take that. You will take that 9.9 times out of 10. The only way you don't take it 10 times out of 10 is if you manage to have a team that has just 100-point players all the way through the lineup. But that's the type of production that you hope for from a guy in Mats Zuccarello, and I don't see any reason that he can't get there here this season. Now, from a special teams perspective, I think the even strength goals for Zuccarello will improve, which means he'll improve on the 13 that he had this past season. I see him more as a 15 to 17 even strength goals type player, but he still is very dangerous on the power play. And that's because him and Kirill Kaprizov have such a good in sync give and go that Kaprizov, who typically draws the most attention on the power play and even on even strength as well, which leads to some opportunities for Zuccarello on the other side of the net that he's able to just take full advantage of. And I fully expect that he could still be somewhere around a 9 goal power play goal scorer this upcoming season because your chain of command on the power play starts and ends with Kirill Kaprizov. You've got Kaprizov, you've also got Joel Eriksson Ek, and probably Mats Zuccarello then or Matt Boldy sliding into that third slot in terms of who is going to gobble up the most goals. Because Kaprizov, just by nature of him being Kirill Kaprizov, is going to get the most. Joel Eriksson Ek is going to clean everything up in front of the net. And so then Boldy and Zuccarello kind of occupy that third spot in that hierarchy. So if this power play is more consistent and has more opportunities that they cash in on, that should lead to right around the same number of power play goals for Zuccarello this past season, which is why I take the over on goals. I just think there are going to be more opportunities, and I think this team will cash in better than they did the previous season. Now, as far as the other statistical categories go, from a minutes perspective, that will be interesting because that top line, it felt like really had to carry the load for a good portion of the season. And if you get more consistent play from the second line to where they can contribute as well, that means that you're not having to rely on those top guys as much. So we could see a little dip in minutes, but I don't know that we'll see a dip in productivity for Mats Zuccarello here this season. Now, what does that look like then for what does that look like for a season? Well, 20, 25 goals, and again, somewhere around the 70 point, maybe 80 on the high end. Somewhere in that range, I think is just a fantastic, a dandy season for Mats Zuccarello. So hope for that, and then just react, I guess, to kind of how things play out the rest of the way. Now, fantasy-wise, Zuccarello is pegged. This is interesting. Zuccarello's projections for 2024, which are now out courtesy of ESPN, 65 games, 19 goals, 38 assists, 57 total points, and 24 total power play points on the season. I think he's going to do better than that this upcoming season. So I'm bullish on the Mats Zuccarello campaign. Granted, looking at what has been put into place for a lot of the fantasy hockey projections, which must have just been completed here recently. Oh boy, I would be taking the over in a lot of cases for this team. So that's kind of what you can expect from a points production standpoint for Mats Zuccarello. What can we expect for the future? What does the future hold for Mats Zuccarello? We will discuss that as we finish today's episode of Locked On Wild after this. Final segment of today's episode of Locked On Wild. Once again, thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. For the everydayers, you can catch our second episode today as we will talk about Jared Spurgeon, what to expect from the captain for the upcoming season. So Mats Zuccarello on the last year of his deal, and he is getting $6 million for this upcoming season. Zuccarello is now 36, so he's getting up there in age, but again, just coming off of the second most points he's ever scored in a season. So here's how this is, I think, going to play out. This is going to be very key position for Bill Guerin to watch, to monitor, because if you start to see some signs of slowing down from Zuccarello, if he blasts out of the gate absolutely red hot and looks like the guy who took over for a couple of months this past season, if he looks like that guy again, then I think there's certainly a discussion to be had about a possible retention, because you are still probably another full year away from the likes of Liam Ugrin, Danila Yurov, and Murat Hustindinov being on this team, because after this season, the assumption is that they will make the trek to North America and start to kind of figure things out at the AHL level. I would imagine, with the way Bill Guerin has handled prospects for this team, I would imagine they'll be given at least the full season to get their toes wet and get used to the North American hockey experience before there's a discussion about them being raised to the NHL level. So you are slim on options at this point to fill on that top line. And so, does it end up being a 1-year deal to keep Zuccarello around and just kind of see? Because there's another side to this too, is how much longer is Zuccarello going to want to play? Just had a child, so dealing with being a dad. As the season wore on last year, and now kind of having the off season to do that. That's the reason that a lot of guys hang it up, is wanting to have the opportunity to be with their families more. And I'm not saying that Zuccarello is going to pick that at this point. Nobody can know but him, but you just have to lay out the options as to, what does the player want? How much longer does he want to play? And how much longer is he productive enough to justify signing him to an extension to keep him around? It would probably not be at a $6 million figure. In fact, it really can't be for the Wild to be able to afford it after this season is done. And so if he takes a little less to stick around for probably at most 2 seasons, I think a 1-year extension is probably is something that I would be completely fine with, to be honest, if this season goes well. If it doesn't, then you go the route of Matt Dumba or some of those other players that um, have just made the decision and made the trek elsewhere through free agency. Because here's the other thing too, is that other teams see what's going on. They have access to the film. They study. They know what these players can and can't do. And so you can't sell teams on players at the trade deadline if their value is down, if it's not what it used to be, while also expecting to get an adequate return for them in a trade. So if Zuccarello lights it up to start the season, then I honestly, just because the other options are a little further off, um, I'd be fine with giving him another year just to keep that going and keep 97 as happy as you possibly can here for the next couple of seasons. But then again, if we see some signs of decline, if we see some age start to show, then maybe Bill Guerin just elects to fill internally and not go that route once the season is over. That will be very interesting to see how that plays out, and we will of course keep an eye on it amongst everything else as the season unfolds. I did want to finish today by just trying to kind of lay out what this will mean for Locked on Wild having credentials to be able to go to every home game this upcoming season. And basically, what it means is that we are going to be treating you to more. We're going to be treating you to more coverage consistently from the XL Energy Center, and hopefully this will lead to opportunities to explore other options, other avenues that have not previously been available to this show. Potentially things like player interviews, like access before games. You can be very well assured that I'll be trying to get to morning skates as well, just to try to get as much of a pulse on this team as we possibly can to keep you informed, to continue to make Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day and your go-to source on anything that happens throughout the course of this season. And that translates to the minor league system as well, to the prospect pool. We want to try to continue to do more as we have with the Iowa Wild and even the Iowa Heartlanders as well. And so basically, the encompassing goal for Locked On Wild this season is going to be to have the pulse on anything that happens from the top to the bottom. If it happens in Minnesota Wild hockey, we are going to have a reaction to it, and you are going to know what is going on throughout the course of the season, because this show is so much fun to do because of the fans, of the listeners, of Wild fans and Locked On Wild listeners that just keep tuning in on a daily basis and making this the spot to get all of your information. So, a thank you from me for continuing to stick with us here through a very quiet off season, which has been a challenge at points, but we moved through it. We are continuing to get closer to the start of the season, and that just means that we are going to have as much hockey as you can possibly handle as the season gets going. So thank you for staying with us. Thank you for tuning in. More coming. Here's to Locked On Wild for a full season. Cannot wait to get things started. If you have yet to, make sure you use this opportunity to subscribe on YouTube and your favorite podcast platform so you don't miss out on any of our new content throughout the course of the week and the rest of the off season. You can find new episodes every Monday through Friday as part of the Locked On Podcast Network.